Chapter 2 Loneliness. Carolyn smiled bravely as she knelt to lay out the laurel leaves she gathered on the rubble where Apollo's great pavilion had stood. She still had her training as a Starfleet officer, and intended to carry out her plan to honor and remember the gentle alien who had called himself a god. She would not allow herself to fall apart helplessly in useless tears. It was so quiet. In the short minutes and hours that Carolyn had spent so far on the planet, alone since the Enterprise had left, she already felt lonely. She couldn't imagine how Apollo must have suffered. Feeling that loneliness for centuries, she felt a terrible heartache and sense of guilt. Not for the first time, at having had to be the one to betray Apollo's joy at seeing humanity again. She knew that in her own mortal lifespan she could never come close to feeling the desperate loneliness and isolation that he had felt. Carolyn slowly rose to her feet, regretting that things hadn't been different. She missed Apollo terribly. She decided to walk in the garden. As she slowly walked amidst the flowers, sampling their various beautiful aromas, and feeling melancholy, she almost thought she could hear Apollo's voice in the wind calling her.
Carol, why? I loved you.
The sound of his voice echoing in her mind and ears tormented her. A soft breeze brushed past her face, carrying Apollo's voice to her again, more loudly this time, as it gently rustled through her hair.
Carolyn.
Carolyn's breath caught in her throat, and an impossible hope stabbed through her heart.
Apollo!
She whispered breathlessly, and ran back toward the ruined pavilion. Tears blurred her vision and she stumbled, but kept running. After painfully long seconds, the pavilion finally came into view. As Carolyn ran to it, she saw Apollo laying stretched out on the same smooth white bench that was one of the few parts of the great structure that was still intact.
Oh, Apollo!
She sobbed as she dropped to her knees next to the gentle, heartbroken alien and flung herself across his chest, holding him protectively and possessively in her arms. She laid her head in his chest, listening to the reassuring sounds of his heartbeat as her tears flowed down onto his shoulder.
Apollo, can you ever forgive me?
Carolyn.
Apollo breathed, seeming to be amazed as she was that they were here, together.
You came back to me.
I never left you.
Carolyn cried.
When the Enterprise left, I stayed behind, because I do love you, Apollo. I love you so much.
Words failed her then, and her body shook with sobs. She felt Apollo reach up around her to embrace her comfortingly, as weak as he seemed. Sensing her confusion, Apollo began to answer the question Carolyn couldn't collect herself enough to ask.
Hera? The others? They're all gone. Long gone.
His voice broke with emotion as he spoke.
They did not hear me ask to take me with them.
Carolyn raised her head to look at Apollo, her eyes round with wonder.
Of course.
She realized, her Starfleet training and experience helping her to put the facts together.
We thought you had left, but you just disappeared the same way as when you were exhausted before.
Yes.
Apollo agreed. He reached up to gently caress Carolyn's hair with one hand. He seemed to be regaining his strength already.
My beautiful Carolyn. I was a whisper on the wind. It is your love that has helped me to recover so soon.
I can't imagine what it's been like for you,
Carolyn said, tenderly brushing her fingers across Apollo's cheek.
all those years of waiting, alone. It must have been so terribly lonely. Is that what mankind owes you and your people for all your kindness?
It doesn't matter now,
Apollo replied, sitting up. Carolyn moved to sit next to him as he continued.
You're with me now, and together we can go anywhere we wish.
With one arm still around Carolyn, Apollo waved the other arm expansively at the sky. Carolyn looked up, following his gaze, and smiled.
Together,
She agreed.